So, the overall theme of my talk actually is developing speaker learners' BELF competence for authentic BELF communication. I should start with a few terminological clarifications. Speaker learners. A few years ago, I've started using this term instead of just speaker or user, speaker learner, because we are all speakers and learners in a way at the same time when we engage in communication and in learning. BELF, with a B in brackets, I want to indicate that I'm kind of in between ELF and BELF. And I will mainly look from an ELF perspective at BELF, but then I think with regard to ELF and BELF, what I intend to talk about, what I intend to get across to you is kind of universal for this, in my understanding, in this context. Authentic BELF communication. So it's about communication, not repertoires, of course. And authenticity, Evan, a few years ago, drew attention to the deceptive promises of authenticity in language learning. Real texts in classrooms, out of context, often very specific, too challenging or simply irrelevant for a particular learner. Authentic audio and video recordings with all these overlaps and messiness of real conversation. This, of course, rings a bell. And we can go back to Henry Widdowson's distinction between genuine and authentic. Authentic, genuine for Widdowson is that something happens out there in the real world. Authentic means authentic for the speaker, authentic for the learner, or in my words, for the speaker learner. In terms of pedagogical interventions, this means that if we want to introduce authenticity in our classrooms, the task is not so much picking things from out there that has occurred, but rather making the things we introduce, materials or activities, authentic for our students. That is, authentication processes are involved. A common feature of authenticated BELF communication are communicative surprises. Communicative surprises in the sense of when nothing turns out as was practiced and expected, when speaker learners are forced to go beyond tried and trusted repertoires and routines, when all that is left is their BELT, ELT, English repertoire, their natural capability for communication, and their sense of agency and emancipation. The key questions I would like to address against this backdrop concern, first, what is the nature of speaker learners' capability for communication, and how can it help them cope with surprises in authentic BELF communication? Second, is BIT's English preference for standard English in conflict with successful BELF communication? And third, how can speaker learners develop their agency and emancipation so as to become able to make best BELF use of their BELT English repertoire and their communicative capability? So the first question, what is the nature of speaker learners' capability for communication? And how can it help them cope with these BELF surprises? Well, first of all, there are these two qualities of pragmatic creativity and strategic processing. Again, it is Henry Whittleson who points us in this direction. In all uses of the language, we find innovative grammatical and lexical expressions, variable encodings that are not sanctioned by established convention, that exploit the hitherto unexplored possibilities in what I, Henry Whittleson, have referred to as the virtual language. And together with Barbara Seidelhofer, he continues to emphasize that incompetent users of English, in the sense of deviating from the standards they have been exposed to in class, incompetent users of English can be capable communicators, and indeed, even more, their capability in many ways depends on their incompetence, this kind of incompetence of deviating from established norms. A word of caution is in place here. The term virtual English seems to suggest as if it were something hovering out there somewhere. But no, virtual English is not a given, somehow given repertoire. Rather, virtual English is English in the making, English on the move. It emerges from speaker-learners' strategic deployment of their pragmatic creativity, and only insofar as they trust and are able to trust their agency and emancipation. So the big question is, if virtual English is in this sense a vast and uncharted, unexplored space, how and where do speaker learners get their orientation and guidance when moving through this space? In the literature on ELF pedagogy and BELF pedagogy, intelligibility stands very high. It's all about intelligibility. But successful communication is a lot more than, well, I would like to say just intelligible communication. This is where personal requirements, the speaker learner's personal requirements of communicative and communal success come in. Who do they want to be? Of course, there are these usual suspects, expressing meaning, intentions, being understood, understanding others, being professional, speaking like members of a certain community, engaging in translanguaging beyond their English, be cooperative and empathetic, meet certain learning objectives. Well, these personal requirements of communicative and communal success are actually the heart of agency and emancipation. They are the beacons for orientation and guidance, and meeting them ensures speaker satisfaction. Contextual inferencing in comprehension and production is another important quality of communicative capability, as well as expressing one's thoughts when speaking and writing. Let's take a closer look at these. Contextual inferencing. Well, this is a quote from Blakemore, an example from Blakemore, Understanding Utterances. Do you enjoy your holiday? The beaches were crowded. and the hotel was full of bugs is the answer. Perfectly easy for us to understand. And but we need to invest a lot of activities in order to understand this utterance, the reply. This is where explicatures and implicatures, following Sperber and Wilson's relevance theory, explicatures and implicatures come in. Of course, the explicatures, the beaches, which beaches? The beaches near the hotel where I stayed, crowded by whom? With tourists, with fishermen. And in addition, on top of that, the hotel, which hotel? The hotel where I stayed was full of bugs. What kind of bugs? Insects, spying devices. So we have to add a lot to the meaning that is explicitly specified here in order to understand it all. And the implicature, the strong implicature is, of course, no, I didn't like it. Or it could be a weaker implicature, I won't go there again. But then depending on the context, depending on what you know about the speaker, you might easily understand this reply to convey, wow, I liked it a lot. Contextual inferencing also plays an important role in production. Now, in the sense of audience modeling, when we produce our utterances, we have our audience in mind and their repertoire, available repertoires, and their contextual inferencing capabilities. And we design our utterances accordingly. Now here we have these strategies of comprehension processing, let it pass, wait and see, co-construction, handling misunderstandings. In production, it's accommodation, and then the others as well. Strategic processing means, well, I do not analyze an utterance as a computer would do, but I do it with a certain communicative objective in mind. My requirements come in again. And depending on these requirements, depending on the situation, I will strategically process the utterances differently. And one point I would just very briefly mention this, expressing one's thoughts. We tend to say, well, this is what I wanted to say. Well, it's hardly ever this is what I wanted to say. Rather, this is what I've said, I look at it and I'm satisfied with it. That is, the meaning I convey gradually develops while I'm speaking, and partly in a fairly chaotic way. It emerges, and it's the same in writing, only we don't tend to notice this because when we look at the end product, but when you look at the process of writing, you have the same messiness and dynamic development. All these things, pragmatic creativity, strategic processing, contextual inferencing, all these things only work insofar as we are cooperative in our attitudes and in our behavior, insofar as we show empathetic rapport. And then a final quality feature I would like to mention, communication monitoring. While we speak, we continuously monitor what we are doing. We listen to ourselves, we look at what we have written, we monitor it continuously with regard to our requirements. BELF competence and communicative capability are different things. BELF competence, in my understanding, is being able to make best use of one's BELT repertoire and communicative capability in BELF communication and when faced with BELF surprises. being able to make best use of what I have available in terms of repertoires and communicative capability. Well, the second question concerns BLT's preference for standard English and whether it is in conflict with success in BELF communication. Why is this question important? Well, it is important because of this widespread critique of ELT from a global English's ELF perspective. The global spread of English calls for a paradigm shift in TESOL curricula to address the mismatch between what is taught in the classroom and how English functions outside the classroom. Very true. This critique goes along with, in pedagogical terms, with what I would like to call the GELF awareness movement. Nikos Sifakis puts this in these words: what ELF users know and how they interact should inform lesson plans, teacher training curricula, textbooks, policies, assessment procedures in ways that will render the ELT experience richer and deeper and closer to the realistic experience of what has come to be global communication via English. In the Erasmus project, in which you find indeed rich outcomes concerning the GELF movement. Go to the website and you find the course and the handbook. Now, the message, when you look at this, the message for teachers seems to be clear. For pedagogical orientation, beware of the ELT's standard English preference. Rely on the realities of GELF communication. And what does this result in? I've often encountered this in talks with teachers and teacher educators. And when you look at the literature out there concerning attitude studies and so forth, it raises feelings of ambivalence and insecurity regarding what kind of English should be taught and learned. If it's not the kind of English we teach in ELT, what kind of English is it? Is it what we observe out there? Where shall we turn for an answer? Well, interestingly enough, from the GELF perspective, these things don't seem to be that dramatic. The purpose of ELF research, Nicola Galloway says, is not to establish a teachable model and to prescribe what should be taught in the ELT classroom. GELT simply requires that we consider the learner's context and their needs when thinking about what target language to include. Well, but I think for people who are or feel insecure about what to teach and what to learn, this doesn't help much. I would suggest to take a look at the other side of the moon. And the other side of the moon, that is speaker learners' own GELF communication, instead of other people's GELF communication. And in this respect, we need to make an important distinction, which is very trivial, and every teacher is aware of it, but I haven't found many traces of it in the ELF and GELF pedagogy debates. And that is the distinction between teaching and learning for comprehension and teaching and learning for production. Of course, for comprehension teaching, rich communicative exposure to a wide variety of Englishes is necessary. And there's certainly a lack of this in ELT. things have been changing recently, but only in a very limited ways. When I look at what happens in our schools, in the business context, I would say it's certainly different. Now, with regard to teaching and learning for production, that is, for the English I want to use for my own spoken and written productions, is it communicative exposure to a wide variety of Englishes? Well, to a certain extent, I certainly find my models out there, but I think in this respect, we need a shift in perspective. And Barbara Seidelhofer actually argues for such a shift when she says, what really matters is that the language taught for production is that the language should engage the learner's reality and activate the learning process. Now, this is what we need to take a closer look at now. How do we acquire our English repertoires for production? From a social constructivist perspective, speaker learners acquire the English taught by creating their own version of it. It's not like acquiring a car, which is out there and you buy it and put it in your garage. You have to create your own version of English in order of the English you are exposed to, the English that is taught in order to acquire it. And this is through communication practices and in cooperation with others. And it is influenced by both individual and social dispositions and forces. And most importantly, in terms of orientation and guidance, it is guided by speaker learners' personal requirements of communicative and communal success. It's about my English, my language, a translingual repertoire ranging from standard to casual to boldly creative. And this is that things are this way. This is not a pedagogical option, but it is part of the human condition for learning. And it has implications for teaching English or any other language, by the way. It is necessary to change the EIT, the BELT approach. True. But this change involves a change or a shift from a strict, almost behavioristic copying cloning orientation towards the target language to an open social constructivist orientation, which provides room for speaker learners to make the English taught their own, to trust their creative agency as emancipated non-native speakers of English. The aim is for speakers' satisfaction, guided by their personal requirements of communicative and communal success. Students need to be taken serious as agents, as agents of their own learning. And in terms of these personal requirements of success, of course, you see that an important part of teaching will be for teachers to reconcile or to make what learners have to learn in the classroom, to enable them to make it their own, to incorporate it in their own requirements of success, which of course is very, very difficult in the normal classroom. And this is where I see a big challenge. And it has a lot to do with teaching in the sense of enabling learners to learn for life. So with regard to standard English, there's a big misunderstanding. As far as developing competence for BELF communication is concerned, the problem with BELF is not its orientation towards standard English. Learners can have other reasons and do have other reasons for being opposed against standard English. Cultural ones, historical ones, colonial backgrounds, and the like. With regard to developing competence for BELF communication, standard English is not the problem. Rather, the problem is what speaker learners are allowed, encouraged, and supported to do with this orientation. And this is teaching for learning. And learning is always more, as you are all aware of, than simply picking up what is taught. So teaching for learning, developing speaker learners' agency and emancipation. This requires acknowledging and respecting their My English repertoires, communicative capabilities, requirements of communicative and communal success. And the emancipatory project of BELF pedagogy is not liberating speaker learners from standard English, as so often proposed in the literature. It is rather to empower them, to make it the English that is taught, to make it their own. Speaker learners' social constructivist capability for My English communication and learning actually incorporates the possibility of non-native speaker agency and emancipation. So in the end, speaker learners should be able to like what they see in the mirror. Speaking and learning a language is about identity. The third question, how can speaker learners develop their agency and emancipation so as to be able to make best use, BELF use of their BELT English repertoire and their communicative capability? Well, this is where my understanding or my concept of an immersive pedagogical lingua franca approach comes in, quasi as an extension of an ELF extension of communicative language teaching. BELT students of different lingua cultural backgrounds communicate with each other using their My English repertoires as a pedagogical lingua franca, preferably implemented in a blended learning environment where you have intercultural virtual exchanges and pedagogical mentoring. Pedagogical intercultural virtual exchange might involve, would involve preparation and follow-up in class, and then the online session, video conferencing. I very much liked in our Tequila project, the virtual world, Padlet, and other things you certainly work with. My own preference is for small group cooperations and discussions outside class. Well, in the business context, I would assume it's anyways more flexible than in schools in this respect. And I always, in the school context, had a preference for accessible topics like breakfast, waste avoidance, which have something to do with the students' real lives, where they have their own opinions, where they don't first need to study things in order to bring in their comments and so forth. Pedagogical mentoring during, before, after, depending, the online interaction, of course, concerns pedagogical organization and technologies, but more importantly, making students aware of their social constructivist responsibility for their own communication and learning. Negotiating requirements of communicative and communal success with regard to the objectives of the course, with regard to the other participants. Emphasizing cooperativity and empathetic rapport. And what I call augmented communication monitoring. It's more than the kind of communication monitoring we normally use in everyday communication or in your business contexts. There are a lot of restrictions, politeness, cultural conventions, and so forth. And when you look at how people communicate in real communication, you notice that they do not make full use of their communication monitoring capabilities and the strategies involved, and that this takes away a lot of the potential learning opportunities that are given with this situation. And by augmented, I mean that for this pedagogical mentoring, for this pedagogical immersion approach, we need to go beyond how we monitor our own performance and the performance of the others with regard to success, in order to make full use of the learning potential given. Well, this is just a glimpse at our Tekola project. Later, I'm sure you will have the access to the slides and to the link. There is. Let me just show you what it's like, and then we are done. So here under resources, you find all kinds of, so tasks is important, of course, the tools, pedagogical guides, case studies, and let's have a quick look at tasks. So we have tasks. This is meant for and developed for the school context, of course, but many things can be adapted, I would say, for the business context. What you have for breakfast, about myself and my school, and the way it is set up. We have a task description here, and the way it is described here is.
Sorry, Professor Kohn, I can only see your slide. Are we supposed to be able to see the website?
Oh, this doesn't show. Okay.
Yeah, I think you might have to reshare if you want us to see the website, because we still see that slide.
Yeah, okay. No, but then we better stop here. And I think you can look at the slides at the website yourself, and or maybe we can do it later with a separate thing. So obviously it doesn't work when it's embedded here in yeah, that's a pity. Okay. Okay, yes. So this is what I wanted to share with you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And,
such a pleasure.
So here on the first page, you have the link to the website again. So when you have the slides separately, then